class today, August 8th. This is our 16th class of Drg Drsya Viveka. So let us chant verses 7 through 11. Okay, so I'll just chant it. The 11th verse I will chant twice because it's a new one, but the other ones I'll just chant once. Before that, let us do the prayer. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Number 7. Chaya Hankarayo Raikyam Taptayaf Pindavan Matam Tadahankaratadaatmyat Dehascetanatagata Cetanatam gatat Ahankarasya tadatmyam Chitchaya dehasakshibihi Sahajam karmajam bhranti Janyancha trividham kramat Sambandhino sato nasti Nivritti sahajasya tu Karmakshayat prabodhacha Nivartete kramadubhe Ahankaralayesh suktau Bhavet dehopyata cetanaha Ahankara vikasardha Swapna sarvastu jagaraha. Number 11. Antakarana vrittischa Chitichaya Chitichaya ikyamagata Antakarana vrittischa Chitichaya aikyamagata Vasana kalpayet swapne Bodhe kshairvishayan Vishayan bahi Vasana kalpayet swapne Bodhe kshairvishayan bahi. So we saw how the experience of our Jagrat Avastha, which is the waking Avastha, and the Swapna Avastha, which is our dream Avastha, how those two come about. But before that we saw in the verse number 6, Chitchaya veshatah buddhau bhanam dhistu dvidha sthita ehankitiranya syat antakarana rupini. So just as a quick revision, as we were just talking about in the last class also, so this life is in the form of a projection of myself. It's a projection in the form of a manifestation which appears to have some kind of a reality, but it doesn't. The only reality is myself. So very similar to what we had been studying all along, that if you were to stand in front of a reflecting surface. So for instance, suppose you are not standing in the middle of in the front of a mirror, but supposing you walk up to a body of water, okay, and then you are standing right next to it. What you will find is that you will now have some reflection in the water, which may be different from the way you look. And so, for example, depends on your angle of looking at it. It may be longer than yourself, or it could be moving depending upon the water. So in any case, there is some kind of a connection, or some kind of an expression, some kind of a manifestation, let's just say, some kind of a manifestation of yourself. You can say that now, if you were walking on the ground, you were just by yourself. But if you were to be walking next to a body of water, like some still lake, then you have some appearance of your reflection, which was not there before. But the reflection has an appearance, but it doesn't really have any reality. It's not as though you have become two, even though you have become two. And as you know very well, that if you go to, or if you have something in your own house, you have multiple mirrors, one on the left hand side, one on the right hand side. Then the two reflections cross each other and you become multiple you. You can see yourself, and you can see yourself in 4 or 5 or 10 or 12 different versions of yourself. But you're not becoming, one does not become 2 or 4 or 10 or 12. The other ones are simply a copy of it. So that's exactly what is being said here in the verse number 6. Chit chaya aveshato buddhau. So here he says that if you analyze your life, you find that you have some experiences of you which are in the form of your reflection. It's kind of hard to see this, because the world has its own some kind of an external reality which has nothing to do with it. But initially that may appear to be like that, but if you think about it, analyze it, and follow the instructions of Vedanta, the Shastra, you will find that the so-called external reality is really nothing but your own reflection. Anyway, so that process of understanding starts by saying that Chit Chaya Avishatau Buddhau. There are two kinds of thoughts. One is, and so the thought is nothing but your reflection, because the thoughts cannot exist without you. You see, so as we were doing it in some of the other classes also, that you cannot, if you cannot have some kind of an ornament without the basic metal, let's say gold, then the ornaments do not have a separate reality. They are dependent on the reality of the gold. So similarly here also, if you have an experience, none of those experiences are possible without you, the very observer. So you see this. It is not as though it exists by itself, even though it appears to. But for you, for in your case, your life must always have you as one of the vastus, one of the entities. And so, that being the case, there is an appearance of something outside, as we will discuss it in more detail in a minute, but that is nothing but a reflection. that reflection is of two kinds. One is the I thought, ahankara. The other one is antakarana. Antakarana means an inner instrument. And the inner instrument is also where you can govern it. And just like, you say you're driving on a car. The car is an instrument, an outside instrument, but you can turn the wheel to take an exit. Or you can say, no, don't take an exit, go straight. So similarly, there is antakaranam. You have your inner organs. So it's an organ means it's an instrument. Your instrument is your mind, and you can say, okay, mind, now do this. Okay, look left. And so the mind tells the eye, he wants me to look on the left-hand side, so please look on the left-hand side. No, turn right on the right-hand side. Look up, look down, like that. And so this is an antakarana. And who does it? The I thought does it. And the I thought is also a thought, as we will see more clearly later on. So ahankara and antakarana are the two reflections of the Atma, the Self. And so we saw all of that. So now in verse number in this being the case, what being the case? That there are two kinds of reflections of yourself. The reality of yourself never changes, but there are two kinds of reflections. One is in mirror number one is in mirror number two. Two kinds of reflections. These two kinds of reflections behave differently in a 24-hour period. So this is being pointed out in verse number 10 and 11. So let's look into that. So verse number 10 talks about the ahankara's behavior in the 3 periods of time during the 24-hour period. And this is all very significant, because the way to analyze who you are and who you are not and all of that involves a survey of your experiences, the basic unit of which is 1 day, 24 hours. So the 24 hours is a very special creation, because there you have 3 different stages. And as I mentioned before, kind of like 3 different movies that you are staging in. And in those 3 stages of your development, of your experience, both the elements, one is the ahankara and the other one is antakarana, play a similar role. So let's look into that. Verse number 10 talks about ahankara's changes in the 3 stages, and verse number 11 talks about antakarana's experience in the 3 stages. Number 10 is for ahankara and number 11 is for antakarana. So in number 10 it says, ahankara laye suptau bhavet deho api achetanaha ahankara vikasardha swapnaha sarvastu jagaraha. So he says that here's what happens. Ahankara goes absent in the deep sleep state, because it's a thought. See, now the self, the Atma, the Chit Swarupa, the Sakshi, never changes. Never changes. It is there during the night, it is there during the day. As I am, I am. Na udeti na astameti esha, na vriddhim yati na kshayam, swayam vibhati athanyani bhasayet sadhanam vina. So that's the reality of the Atma, verse number 5. So that one never changes. But ahankara, the reflection, the I thought, disappears during the deep sleep. This is our experience. As we saw in the last class, this is anubhava. This is what everybody's experience. You cannot say that in last night's I am very different because in last night's deep sleep I was fully awake. No. When you are asleep, that is the definition of sleep, the ahankara also disappears. But the interesting thing is, when the ahankara disappears, the rest of the projection also disappears. Everything disappears. So that means the rest of the projection, including the outside world, including the effect of your experiences on you, all disappear. All disappear. Recently, one of my wife's relatives were visiting, and they decided to rent a house nearby in California so that the brothers and sisters who were far apart could stay together for a few days. And so the second night that they were staying, so they rented a house in a nice vineyard location, and many people are doing. So it's a big house, several bedrooms, all kids all had their own. It was very nice. One night, while they were asleep, somebody came in through an open door while they were asleep and stole some watches, laptops, gifts for the kids. They didn't have a lot, and a wallet. All of that were lost, and this person went through room to room, and apparently the camera caught them. It was at 1 o'clock at night when everybody had gone to sleep, and he came in and he wiped them out. This just happened about 2-3 weeks ago. So what it means is that a person asleep is unaware of the outside things. You can steal things, you can do anything as long as the person is awake, is asleep. So he says, ahankara laye suptau bhavet deho api achetana. Your body also becomes achetana. This is our experience, that if you have a hurt body, then the hurt goes away at night time. It comes up in the morning time. So the behavior of the ahankara is that it disappears for us sometime during the night. This should tell us a lot. The Atma doesn't disappear. One can ask, how come the Atma also, how do you know that the Atma also doesn't disappear? Because when next morning somebody says, this is all given, these instructions are given in the Shastra, in the teaching, the spiritual teaching, that in next morning if somebody wakes up and says, how did you sleep? You say, I slept well. And you cannot say that unless you were the one who was there. So there is not a complete break between day 1 and day 2. You see, there is a continuity of the self. It's not as though you are, otherwise you will be a brand new person. It's a self, the old self has died, has gone to sleep, and a new person has come up. No. There is a continuity of it. And so it is called Pratyabhijna, as we saw in Dakshinamurti Stotram, verse number 6. Rahu grasta devankarendu sadisho Maya samachadinat sanmatra karanopasamharnato yo bhut pushushuptaf puman pragaswapsamiti prabodha samaye yapratyabhigyayate tasmai shri guru murtaye namaidam shri dakshinamurtaye. There is a pratyabhigya means that you have a knowledge that and say, what did you do? I did nothing. But there is a continuity of memory. So the Atma is still there, but the Ahankara disappears. So that is number one of the three. And when the Ahankara disappears, the body also becomes, because the body touches the mind. That's how the consciousness is communicated. Like as we saw, the fire touches the metal vessel, and the metal vessel touches the water. The water does not touch the fire directly. So similarly here also, the body touches the mind and the mind touches the Atma. And so when the mind goes to sleep, Ahankara goes to sleep, the body also cannot be conscious. It's not conscious. And so it is not no effect on you whatsoever. Excuse me. So that's one of the three. Then the second one is Ahankara Vikasardaha Swapna. So now the in the dream state, the Ahankara is half asleep and half awake. What do you mean by half asleep and half awake? It is now awake to some changes, because in deep sleep there were no changes. But in Swapna there are changes. So those changes are projected by the mind themselves. There is no externality to it. There is no outside things around. Its own projection is from the memories of the past. So the mind has the ability to picture some experiences by the memories of the past. It projects it as though they are real. So this is what we study in our Mandukya Upanishad and the Karika that follows it. That, right now when you are awake, you say, oh, that was just a dream, it was not really real. But you know something? When you are dreaming, then the dream is the real and the waking is the unreal. Isn't it? You cannot have the dream without the waking to be disappeared completely. You have some memory of the past, but that's completely different. As far as things going on just now, you have no knowledge of it. So really speaking, this is an important thing to see. The dream and the waking state cancel each other. They isolate each other. It's not as though one is sitting on the top of other. And so if the dream is real, then the waking state is unreal. When the waking state is real, the dream is unreal. So in the dream state, just to go back to it, Ahankara Vikasardha, you mean you are half asleep and half awake. Half awake means that you do have some experiences, but it has nothing to do with outside. Then in Jagaraha, Sarvastu, however, tu here means however, in the waking state you now have a full experience, not half experience. And what do you mean by a full experience? It means now your sense organs are also functioning. They also participate. And so in the dream state, the sense organs do not participate. Only the master sense organ, which is the mind, Mind is also known as the master sense organ. It is a very sophisticated sense organ. So very much like Swami Dayanand used to say that, is that in the old style taxi service, nowadays you have Uber and Lyft and all kinds of different way of having a program tell what the drivers are. But in the taxi service, which are still there is a dispatcher, and the dispatcher has a map in front which says which taxi is where. And so he is a superior taxi person because he has a broader view of what's everything doing. The mind is like that. So the mind is the one which says, my eyes are seeing this. I don't know. I think I better involve my sense of touch. So for instance, you can go to some place and find a very beautiful looking fruit, and you say, well, this is kind of funny. This fruit should not happen in this season. That it doesn't look like it. Like for example, I'm very fond of guavas, and so I always look for, because I grew up with guavas when I was young. We used to have a guava garden in our house, and so we used to climb the tree and pluck all the guavas. So I'm really very partial to it. But you don't find guavas here except for a certain part of the season. So if you see a guava sitting there, you say, that's funny, what is that doing there? So you dispatch the mind and say, go check it out. And the mind says, okay, let me hit the sense of touch, touch it. Sense of touch says, this is a stone guava, it's not a real guava. And if you have any doubts, then you bring it to your nose, and then the sense organ of the smell. So the mind is the one who is managing all of these sense organs. And in the dream, only the mind is functioning. But in the waking state, all of the sense organs, all the taxis are functioning along with the mind. And so that is a complete waking state. So this is how the ahankara works. So in summary, the ahankara is fully asleep, half asleep, and fully awake. So this is the meaning of verse number 10. Now in verse number 11, the similar thing is happening, but in the antakarana. Because those were the two segmentation from verse number 7. So here, antakarana vrittischa chiti chaya aikyam agata vasana kalpayet swapne bodhehi akshaihi vishayan bahihi. Okay, so one was the ahankara and the other one is the antakarani vritti. Okay. So here, the antakarana is not even mentioned during the deep sleep, because it is obvious that just like in verse number 10, in the supti means deep sleep without any dreams. So in supti, just like ahankara disappears, the antakarana also disappears. So that one is obvious, he doesn't even mention it. Whereas he now talks about the distinction between the dream state and the waking state as far as the behavior of the antakarana goes. Okay, so here, just look at it. Antakarana vrittischa means that the Vritti means a modification. So a thought means any modification is called a thought. Without modification there is no thought. And also another thing is that the thought removes the old one and brings in a new form. So for instance, if you're supposing if that doesn't happen, then the old form will still be there and a new form will lie on top of that. So supposing you're seeing a car and then you see a person and the car image is still there and the person image is new and the person image is now sitting on top of the car. No. As soon as you move your eyes, the car image is gone and the person image comes, or some other image comes in the mind. So it's called a modification. This is called vritti. So the whole thought becomes modified. Now, in the case of a dream, the modification happens automatically without the help of any externality. And so there is an image of a person and you can bring it. So this is interesting in the Karika, which is a very advanced text on the Mandukya Upanishad. It is mentioned that it is not necessary that you be totally dreaming to be called a dream. Like you can have a daydream. Not only a daydream, but you can often see something by just thinking about it. So for instance, supposing if you just close your eyes for a minute and I ask you, think about your car. So you can now picture your car. Think about the place you live in from outside. So this means that if you are already familiar with a car or with the place you live or your family member, then there being without it, you can bring it to your mind. And we do it all the time. We do it all the time. We are not always thinking of outside things. We are really thinking of our own thoughts most of the time. So the dream example, it is not necessary that it will be... Now in the dream state, this is all that happens. Because in the waking state, you have a mixture of things that are dictated from outside and things that you project yourself. There is a mixture. In the dream, there is no mixture. It's only a projection of the mind. So here, this point is an important one, and Swami Viditatmananda also made a special mention of this. So if you look at this, Vasanat kalpayite swapne bodhe akshaihi vishayan bahi. So here's the point. So listen to this well. So what happens is that in the Jagrat Avastha, in the waking state, the mind also projects. The mind, because the topic here is Antakarana. This is the Antakarana and not the Ahankara. Ahankara is all done in verse number 10. But in Antakarana, there is a projection. Similar projection, not the same projection, but a similar projection between dream and waking. How? So in the dream it is very obvious it's a projection because you're recalling something from your mind. In the Jagrat Avastha also, so this is an important thing to see. I just wanted to communicate this very clearly to you. In the waking state, you are not seeing things as they are, but as you think they are. So here, Swami Viditatmananda has gone into some detail on this. So this is what is called Ishvara Shrishti and Jiva Shrishti. Ishvara Shrishti means the creation by the Almighty, and Jiva Shrishti means the creation by individuals like you and I. In the dream state, you only have Jiva Srishti. You only have your own creation. There is a possibility, the way the laws of universe are created, there is a possibility that you are actually seeing things of your own experience. That possibility is already provided by the system, as to speak. By the way, one very interesting thing, there are several acharyas who have said that sometimes what you dream about may not be just from this life, it could even have elements from your previous life. It's not a terribly important thing, but it just happens to be an interesting thing. Because in your conscious mind, your previous memory is completely wiped out. Your life as it was before this life, it's wiped out. You cannot remember any of that. It'll be a huge problem if you did. And so there are actually examples of people remembering things from your previous life, but that's really more of an exception. In rule, you do not understand. But because the dream is a way for you to remember things from the past, it may be in some cases, not normally, it may traverse more than one life. Anyway, that's just on the side. So in the dream state, your projection is purely Jiva Srishti. In the Jagrat Avastha, there is a combination. Even though there is a combination, but the main objective of your thoughts is your own projection. So we don't really see things exactly as they are. We put a curtain of our likes and dislikes between them. And those likes and dislikes is what we are seeing. So for example, in the case of a table, you don't have a lot of likes and dislikes. You can say, I wish this table was like this. But in terms of situations and people and so on and so forth, there is nothing good or bad intrinsically. But depending upon our relationship with it, we make a projection. Very simply, this has been given in as an example, that if you look at just say a woman, and that woman is a mother, a daughter, and a worker in some business. So just look at it. That woman's how she appears depends upon who you are. For her mother, she has one way of looking at her daughter. For her children, she has a different way of looking at the mother. As a worker, she is at the office people have a different way of looking at her. So the woman's creation is of course possible by Ishvara, the way that she's born and so on. But her relationship to others depends upon who they are and how they are related to each other. Similarly, you can go, you can have, some kind of a clothing outfit, and one person will say, this is very beautiful. Other person say, no, this is not all that good. This is, that's why sometimes you go to these shops and you find, who will buy this? This is so amazing. This is awful looking. But there are people who buy it. Otherwise, they would not put it in the shop. So we have our own projection. So the point is this. Just like in a dream, what we are seeing is our own projection. In our waking state also, what we are seeing is our projection. There is no such thing as looking at it. You can as a reality. You can look at it objectively, or you can have varying degrees of subjectivity to it. But the point is, what you are looking at is your projection. And in fact, one interesting thing to see, again it goes back to, as we progress, this should be really kept in mind. What you are seeing, no matter whatever you are looking at, whatever you are experiencing, is your own thoughts about it. So here's the thing. I'm looking at this table in front of me. The process of seeing the table is, the table image is projected onto my eye. So the table image in fact gets reversed. It gets inverted and gets into my eye. My eyes activate the molecular structure so that there is a modification of the molecular structure. The molecular structure is communicated to my mind, and the mind looks at the image and makes a judgment of it, and the Sakshi is observing the mind and just blessing it. The mind is making, and so no, one other thing. So now there is a ahankara. So the ahankara now is making a judgment whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Is this a pleasant thing, unpleasant, desirable, undesirable, all those kinds of things based on their experiences. And so then the Sakshi simply blesses it. It's like the sun that simply blesses whether it is a clean road or a messy thing with people throwing all kind of garbage on it. It doesn't really distinguish. Similarly here also, the self. See, this is one of the things people say, how can the self of a good person and a criminal person be the same? That doesn't make any sense. In fact, this is a very big argument of schools of thoughts against Vedanta. So, like for instance, even in the Jainism, in Jains, they feel that there are individual Atmas. There is a good Atma and there is a bad Atma. And you have to change your bad Atma into a good Atma. And just because I have a good Atma, that person has a bad Atma, that means that two are completely different ones. I just have to take care of mine. I don't have to worry about everybody else. Vedanta says no. There is only one Atma. So the Jainis say that, and others, not I'm just pointing out Jainism, but there are others who say, how can you do that? Because if it's the same Atma, if one person is having a terrible time, everybody else should be having a terrible time. But that doesn't happen. So we say, my dear, the Atma is like the sun that blesses, it throws lights on whatever the Ahankara is. If the Ahankara is troubled, it is showing the troubled Ahankara. If the Ahankara is peaceful, it is showing the peaceful Ahankara. And so, for instance, both, this is what in the Ramayana, both Rama and Ravana have the same self. One was a most wonderful person and the other one was the most terrible person, all coexisting. And in fact, they were both Shiva Bhaktas. So Ravana also used to do all chanting and Rudram and whatever, I don't know, but he was also a great Bhakta of Shiva. And Rama, of course, was, Avatara of Ishvara himself. And but one was a terrible person. And so the self remaining the same, it is the Pramata, the Ahankara, who reflects it differently. And so really speaking, the process of looking at things and how we evaluate it, it's just very highly subjective. The mind also is highly subjective. And then also so that's the Ahankara. And then that is the Antakarana. And then the Ahankara also draws conclusions from the past, aspirations about the future, disappointments, etc. Pardon me. So the Ahankara also has high degree of subjectivity. And the Atma just blesses it. And so the reflections can all be different, but the Vastu remains the same. The entity remains the same, which is the Atma. So anyway, to look at this, because it appears, so here's the conclusion of the verse number 11. The conclusion is that even though there is some external world outside of me, but as far as I am concerned, my concern should be with myself. This is what we also did in the meditation in the Purusha Suktam the other day, last Tuesday. Same issue. An important thing to see. I cannot blame anything for my problems. You can do it if you want to, but you're barking at the wrong tree. It doesn't really help you at all. And in fact, do not even blame your own ahankara Don't blame anything. Instead, look at to see what you need to do to get yourself out of this mess. That's all. And to get you outside this mess of life, if you consider it as a mess, if you consider life as wonderful, then fine, okay, we have nothing to communicate to you. But in case you find there is a sense of limitation, then the thing you need to do is to understand exactly what is going on, how projections are made, how reflections are made, what is real, what is not real. This is important. And as we were discussing this in answer to one of the questions in the last class, the reality is that there is a certain experience of the world, and how I interpret it makes me either happy or unhappy. I should take personal responsibility for analyzing my own experiences, taking responsibility for correcting my own mistakes, and getting myself out of this. So the world is really what it is, but it is how I look at it. This is the projection that really makes a difference for me. So this is the message of the verse number 10 and 11. Okay. Now let's go to number 12. I think we still have some time. I think we can cover one more verse. So I will also pronounce this twice. Number 12. Manoham kriti upadanam lingam ekam jadatmakam. Manoham kriti upadanam lingam ekam jadatmakam. Avasthatrayamanveti jayate mriyate tatha. Avasthatrayamanveti jayate mriyate tatha. So the English translation of that is the subtle body, which is inert by nature, is the common material for the mind and the ego. It gains the three states of consciousness, and it is born and it dies. So this is the verse, and we actually did a meditation in the previous class. If you're really interested, you could even listen to the meditation of the Mandukya Karika class, which concluded just prior to this class for half hour, and this is exactly the topic we were looking at it. So I'll try to summarize it for you here. We won't spend as much time as we did in there. So here, this whole process of the Chit Chaya splitting into Ahankara and Antakarana, and how there are three states of being during a 24-hour period, all that is being restated with another verse, but with some important implications. And what it says is, Manaha ahankriti upadanam lingam ekam jadatmakam. So he says that the material of both ahankara and antakarana is what is called linga sharira, lingam ekam, which happens to be inert. So mano ahankriti upadanam lingam ekam. Ekam means singularly it gives the material for both antakarana and ahankara, and also it is inert. And as a result of this inertness, jadatmakam, avasthatrayam anveti jayate mriyate tatha. So it goes into these three states, which we had already seen before, and it is born and it dies. Okay, so let's look into that. So what we had talked about in the meditation, which I will repeat here in the next few minutes, is that there is a material. So every effect has a material. So the effect of, for example, any kind of a shape of an ornament or a shape of a clay cup, for instance, there is a material for it. So now what I find is that there is a plurality of experiences in terms of both antakarana and ahankara, which is an effect. There is a shape to it, there is a name for it, all of that is there. What is the material for it? The material for that is what is called linga sharira. Linga sharira. So this is the software, and it has been analyzed in lots of texts as consisting of sometimes 17 parts, sometimes 19 parts, and it just depends on how you look at it. And so the 17 parts are 5 organs of perception. This is true for everyone, by the way. All of us are endowed with that, unless we have some kind of a problem like we are born blind or born deaf or something, in which case there is a defect. But the basic ingredients are, all of us have 5 organs or sense organs. These are called jnanendriyani. 5 organs of action, karmendriyani. 5 different types of prana, physiological phenomena in our body. And in the case of 17, manaha and buddhi. Those are this. The buddhi is definiteness, and manaha means antakarana. And here in the 17 count of 17, ahankara is included in the buddhi, and in the manaha the memory is included as a chittam in the manaha. But in the 19 you can add 15 earlier and 4 others, which is ahankara, buddhi, manaha and chittam. So now we have 19. This constitutes what is called the material of the projection. This is how the projection comes about. And it also has 2 other words associated with it. So far we have seen manaha ahankriti upadanam. Upadanam means the material, the basic stuff with which all this is born. And it has 2 other words, lingam, lingamekam and jadatmakam. So this is what we talked about in the meditation. So what it means is, first of all, it is inert. It is inert. Inert meaning, just like any other inert thing, it does not have its own consciousness. It borrows the consciousness. It is called jadatmakam. Second one means it is lingam, means that it is a hint. It is an evidence. That lingam means an evidence. We gave this example in the previous class, that for example when there is a fire, there is a black smoke. So the black smoke is a lingam for fire. You don't have to see the fire, but you see the black smoke. And so similarly here, the linga shariram, the material, is a lingam. Lingam for what? It is a lingam for the fact that even though it is jadatmakam, even though it is inert, it seems to be alive. And what that means is, it depends on a source of consciousness. It depends on a source of consciousness which is Atma. So this is the thing about the reflection. The Atma, so the reflection has some form and so on, but it depends upon the person who is being reflected. If that person walks away, the reflection does not have any independent existence. So there's a difference between the real person and the unreal reflection. Similarly here also. So just like you can say, if you see, this is an interesting example. Suppose you see a moving shadow. Suppose you see a moving shadow. You're in the evening and let's imagine let's create a kind of a scary scenario. Supposing you are alone at home at the night time and you see a moving shadow, long shadow with a head and a torso. Don't you immediately feel there is a person who's coming in? You have not seen the person, but you've seen the shadow of the person. That's enough. So linga shariram means, jadatmakam means that it is, even though it should not be moving, because the only thing which is chetana swarupa, which is conscious, is the Atma. Everything else is anatma. Only the electricity is there, but there is no other. You cannot have the appliance have its own electricity. I mean, that's possible. You can generate electricity, but that's a different example. But in a normal case of electricity and a appliance, if the appliance is moving, it's lingam, because there is the presence of electricity. Even though you don't see the electricity, you feel, yes, there is there. Similarly here also, the linga sharira, which is the upadanam for both ahankara as well as antakarana, is an indicator that even though it is inert, it must be reflecting some constant consciousness. And so both of the portions, ahankara and antakarana, are really nothing but a reflection. Even though it is jadatmakam, it shows that there is a real person. Who is that real person? This is what we have to see. And that real person is the Sakshi, the Chit Swarupam, the Atma. I am conscious. That gets reflected into these forms. So that's what it means. It says, Manohankriti upadanam lingam ekam jadatmakam avasthatrayam anveti jayate mriyate tatha. So sometimes it is there, sometimes it is not there, sometimes it is born, sometimes it is gone, and this seems to happen every day, and I'm all caught up with it. I'm all caught up with it because I am very affected by my identification. As you know, we have discussed it before, that my identification becomes like electricity's identification becomes like that of a appliance. And if the appliance is working, I'm happy. If it is not working, I become unhappy, not knowing that I am unaffected by that. So the articulation of the reflection is now summarized is mano ahankriti upadanam lingam ekam jadatmakam avasthatrayam ananveti. It goes to these three stages, sometimes half, sometimes full, sometimes absent, and comes about, raises. At the same time, the Atma is unaffected. So this is how the teaching progresses, and I will end at this time, and we will go into verse number 13 and 14 next time. Okay, with that, let me close the class. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Right, see if you have any questions. Like electricity's identifier, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. So question from Arvind. Ahankara is defined as the fourth element of the Antakarana, Manaha, Buddhi, Chitta and Ahankara. So how do we segregate two or understand with respect to number verse 10 and 11? So Arvind, as I mentioned before, sometimes the Buddhi and Ahankara are clubbed into one, which should be called Buddhi, and Chittam and Manaha are clubbed into the second segment, which will be called Manaha. So sometimes it is Manaha and Buddhi, and sometimes it is Ahankara, Buddhi, Manaha and Chittam. And the reason this is done is because there is, even though these are all vrittis, as we discussed, the word vritti means modifications. These are all thoughts. So even though they are all thoughts, there is a distinction between buddhi and mana. And that distinction is definite knowledge and indefinite thinking. Definite knowledge is called buddhi. So that's the distinction. So what do you mean by definite knowledge? So there are various things that we know for sure. The famous example given in the is that Each one of us know I am a female or a male. It's not a question of speculation. I know it. That this is a table is now well ascertained. This is buddhi. So here the ahankara is clubbed along with buddhi because ahankara means I am. You don't have any doubts about it. You cannot go to a doctor and says, "Doctor, I need to make an appointment with you." So he says, "What's your problem?" You say, "I want to know whether I am or not." That doesn't happen. There cannot be a situation where you can go to anyone and say, "Am I there or not?" This is called buddhi. So there, from that standpoint, ahankara, which means the I thought, is a definite thought along with buddhi. And then there are the uncertain thoughts about things. Should I buy a mango? Is this ripe? Avocado, is this ripe or not? And so you feel it. You're not sure. Or who is this person? I'm not sure. Somebody is coming from a distance. You can see a person coming in, but you're not sure who that is. All those are part of the manaha. And memory is also clubbed along with it, because especially if you're come to my age, my memory is now starting to fail. I'm telling you, it is such an interesting thing how memory is fading. If I don't see a person for a while, I forget their names. I used to be able to remember it, no longer. And I tell you, this is one of the things that I think about, because I remember, so I've inherited my father's memory. My mother was different. Mother's memory was excellent. But my father's memory was just like this. And so I remember he was always upset about the fact that his memory was not the same. And I resolved that if I ever grow to be that old or close to that old, I am not going to complain about the fact that my memory is bad. Because I says, what is the use of it? You know, you can learn from people's behavior, even your dad's behavior, the good and the bad part of it. My father was very upset. I cannot believe that my memory is gone. Hey, this is Ishvara's wish. At that point, you should now start. In fact, it is good that you forget. You should just be with yourself. You don't have to remember everybody. My wife will tell me, "Do you remember the name of the person?" I'll say, "Nope, I don't remember." That's the end of it. I'm not upset. What can you do? So the memory is also uncertain. Then thoughts are also uncertain. So both chittam and manaha are usually clubbed together in some cases, and ahankara and buddhi are clubbed together in some other cases. That's all. Hope I'm clear with that. And Shri says, "Did I understand you to say there is continuity of memory in deep sleep? If so, what is the relationship to Atma?" So, and Shri, there is no memory in deep sleep. But if your question was with respect to dream, see, so I just want to be sure. In deep sleep, there is no memory, no nothing. You have only two things in deep memory. One is Atma and one is ignorance. I am there as a conscious person, but I don't know anything. Total ignorance. Those are the only two things that happen in deep sleep. But if your question was with respect to dream, the dream is nothing but memory. Totally memory driven. That's all. So I wouldn't say continuity of memory, because it's not the same memory that goes. In fact, even if you were to have two dreams given a night, you don't have the same thing. Sometimes you have, we don't know the rules of it. Sometimes you have multiple dreams with similar subject matter. You're upset at something, and dream number 1 is also the expression of your being upset. Dream number 2 is also an expression of being upset, but they are two different things. There's some continuity, but not a lot. So there's no continuity as such, but the dream only consists of memory. That's it. That's all I say. So the relationship to the Atma means that there is a different kind of reflection. So the person, you can imagine, I don't know, I'm just making this up. So for example, you you had a you are standing. So let's say you are in a train. You are in a train, and as the train moves, your reflection in the window also keeps changing depending upon how sunlight is falling on it, other people in the background, etc., etc. So you're just looking at yourself, and sometimes your face becomes very clear, sometimes there is a clutter, like that. So the relationship between a dream, and really for that matter, between your waking state and the Atma is simply lighting up your different experiences. Sometimes this kind of experience, sometimes that kind of an experience. By itself as a sakshi, it does not change. It is not an object. It has no parts. It is just I am and I know. And it just says, I know this, now I know that, but in all of those cases, I know. So that is the Atma, and that is the relationship between them. So let me ignore Sam's question for a minute and continue on with and Shri. Thank you for the clarification. I was asking about deep sleep. The clarity of Atma or ignorance is illuminating. Yeah, okay. So I hope that you accept that. Sam says, did I remember that I had a good sleep? Yeah, you do. Because what will happen is, when you wake up in the morning and somebody says, it's good form, for example, to ask your partner or a spouse, how did you sleep? It's good to do in the morning, just to be polite to them. And what is that person going to say? That person says, oh, I did not have a good sleep. And so what happens is that if it gets interrupted by things, then you feel it was not a good sleep. Or the person can say, yes, I slept well. And so either way, there is a appearance. Sam, the only time when this question will become relevant is if somebody says, how did you sleep? And the other one says, I don't understand your question. Hey, my question is, how did you sleep last night? And he says, I have no idea. What are you talking about? That means I was not there. You know, just like you ask somebody and says, um, how was the movie? Let's say, I'm just making things up. How was the movie? And the person says, I never saw it, so I don't know how it was. So similarly, if you ask somebody, how did you sleep? And the other person says, what sleep? What are you talking about? I never was asleep. It does not happen. There's always a qualitative answer. I slept okay, or I slept well, or it was terrible, something or the other. That means you were there to answer that question. Otherwise, you will have a blank look on your face and say, don't ask me these questions like that because I have no idea. Doesn't happen. This shows the continuity of the Atma. Same thing is true as Balyadishu api Jagradadishu tatha sarvasva avasthasvapi, number 6 of Dakshinamurti Stotra. You are young, you are old, there is a continuity. And yet there is a change. When I was young, I am no longer young. But I am the same person who was young, same person who is old. This is the funny creation. And Shri asked, who is remembering the good sleep? So, good question. I, with the help of my mind, is remembering what a good sleep or not. So the I doesn't change, but the I, with the help of the antakarana and ahankara, remembers whether it was a good sleep or not. So yeah, good questions, because the Atma does not admit of any change, but the ahankara includes the memory and all those things, and with respect to that, I do know. So here's the thing. As we saw in the Linga Sharira discussion, the consciousness is always provided by the Atma. But the decisions about good or bad, memory or not, is provided by the ahankara and all of its supporting things. And the Atma always simply says, okay, now you recall what was good, what was bad. So in that sense, it is the Atma with the help of the ahankara recalls whether it was a good sleep or not. Something like that. Satish Jalota makes a point that our body recoups during deep sleep. That itself is a proof that you were in deep sleep. Yes, of course. Yes, true. Anyway, I again would offer that if you had some questions that were unresolved and you wanted to ask me, please send me an email, and I will try to go over that. Sam Dillon asked me a question about the difference between the Vedantic meditation and the yogic meditation, but he asked it in a different class, so I intend to answer that next Tuesday. So I will take up more in-depth questions like that for the benefit of everybody. So feel free, if you want, to send me an email regarding that. All right, if that is okay, then I will take your leave. Good. We'll see you next week. Om.